Welcome to Story Station, episode 34. In this episode, you can listen to two Chinese stories. The first story is titled, The Cave of Beasts. This is a tale of two courageous sisters who fended for themselves in the dangerous mountains when their father abandoned them. The second story is titled, The Storm Dragon. This is a story of a wealthy man experiencing the results of years of evil behavior. Hope you enjoy it! I will read a story called The Cave of Beasts. Once upon a time, there was a family in which there were 7 daughters. One day, when the father went out to gather wood, he found 7 wild duck eggs. He brought them home, but did not think of giving any to his children, intending to eat them himself with his wife. In the evening, the oldest daughter woke up and asked her mother what she was cooking. The mother said, "I am cooking wild duck eggs. I will give you one, but you must not let your sisters know." And so she gave her one. And the second daughter woke up and asked her mother what she was cooking. She said, "Wild duck eggs. If you will not tell your sisters, I will give you one." And so it went. At last, the daughters had eaten all the eggs, and there were none left. In the morning, the father was very angry with the children, and said, "Who wants to go along to grandmother?" But he intended to lead the children into the mountains and let the wolves devour them there. The older daughters suspected this and said, "We're not going along." But the 2 younger ones said, "We will go with you." And so they drove off with their father. After they had driven a good ways, they asked, "Will we soon get to grandmother's house?" "Right away," said the father. And when they had reached the mountains, he told them, "Wait here. I will drive into the village ahead of you and tell grandmother that you are coming." And then he drove off with the donkey cart. They waited and waited, but their father did not come. At last, they decided that their father would not come back to fetch them, and that he had left them alone in the mountains. So they went further and further into the hills, seeking a shelter for the night. Then they spied a great stone. This they selected for a pillow, and rolled it over to the place where they were going to lie down to sleep. And then they saw that the stone was the door to a cave. There was a light in the cave, and they went into it. The light they had seen came from many precious stones and jewels of every sort in the cave, which belonged to a fox and a wolf. They had a number of jars of precious stones and pearls that shone by night. The girl said, "What a lovely cave this is! We will lie right down and go to bed." For there stood 2 golden beds with gold embroidered covers. So they lay down and fell asleep. During the night, the wolf and the fox came home. The wolf said, "I smell human flesh." But the fox replied, "Oh, nonsense! There are no human beings who can enter a cave. We lock it up too well for that." The wolf said, "Very well then, let us lie down in our beds and sleep." But the fox answered, "Let us curl up in the kettles on the earth. They still hold a little warmth from the fire." The one kettle was of gold and the other of silver, and they curled up in them. When the girls rose early in the morning, they saw the wolf and the fox lying there, and they were much frightened. They put the covers on the kettles and heaped a number of big stones on them, so that the wolf and the fox could not get out again. Then they made a fire. The wolf and the fox said, "Oh, how nice and warm it is this morning! How does that happen?" But at length it grew too hot for them. Then they noticed that the 2 girls had kindled a fire, and they cried, "Let us out! We'll give you lots of precious stones and lots of gold. We'll do you no harm." But the girls would not listen to them, and kept on making a bigger fire. So that was the end of the wolf and the fox and the kettles. Then the girls lived happily for a number of days in the cave. But their father was seized with a longing for his daughters, and he went into the mountains to look for them. He sat right down on the stone in front of the cave to rest, and tapped his pipe against it to empty the ashes. When the girls within called out, "Who's knocking at our door?" And the father said, "Are those not my daughters' voices?" Well, the daughters replied, "Is that not our father's voice?" Then they pushed aside the stone, and saw that it was their father. And their father was glad to see them once more. He was much surprised to think they should have chanced on this cave full of precious stones, and they told him the whole story. Then their father fetched people to help him carry home the jewels, and when they got home, his wife wondered where he had obtained all these treasures. So the father and daughters told her everything, and they became a very wealthy family, and lived very happily to the rest of their days. The end. I hope you enjoyed this story. The next story begins in a moment. Today I will read the ancient Chinese story, The Storm Dragon. Shen of Taisang was wealthy, but a brutal and inhumane man, who treated his fellow citizens shamefully, and especially exhibited his bad character in damaging their instruments and machines, or any utensil which were used by workers in tilling the soil, manufacturing, fishing, hunting, and other occupations of life. Once, when he was building a guest hall in his house, he hired Liu of a neighbouring village, well known as a skilled sculptor, to carve some figures on pillars and beams. But when the artist had finished his work, Shen refused to pay him the stipulated sum. The sculptor remonstrated, and the dispute was finally settled by a lawsuit against Shen, who for this reason began to scheme for revenge. Some time later, the Buddhist priests in southern metropolis intended to have the statues of 500 arhats carved for their temple, and having heard of Liu's fame, invited him to compete for the task. Shen thought his opportunity had come, so he hired a man to join Liu's party. While on the way, this villain, following the instructions of Shen, spoiled the instruments of the sculptor, and absconded without being discovered. When Liu, on his arrival, could use none of his tools, he was unable to compete with the native sculptors, whereby he lost his employment and became quite destitute. Since Shen continued in his evil practices, his daughter-in-law warned him that unless he reformed, heaven would certainly visit the family with misfortune. But Shen resented her words and drove her from his home, charging her with impudence and disobedience. Before she was more than a mile or so away from the house, there came a sudden terrific outburst of thunder and lightning, and she hid herself in the woods near by. Then she saw a scarlet dragon come out of the black clouds and enter Shen's residence. The building was completely wrecked, everything inside destroyed, and every living thing instantly killed. No member of the family escaped, except the daughter-in-law, who had been driven out. Heaven favored her, and she lived a long and prosperous life. The end. I hope you liked this story. Thank you for listening to Story Station. We are adding stories as frequently as possible, so check back often. We would love to hear your feedback and any questions you may have. Thank you.